Welcome to Avoidant Decoded. If you've ever felt confused by someone who comes close and then pulls away, you're in the right place. This space is not just about understanding them, but about understanding yourself within the connection. If you're ready to stop chasing clarity and start seeing the truth behind these patterns, consider becoming a member of this channel, because here, we don't just talk about behavior, we decode it. What if the person pulling away from you isn't losing interest, but actually feeling too much, too deeply, and doesn't know how to hold it? What if the silence that confuses you isn't rejection, but protection from emotions they were never taught to handle? Imagine being in a connection that feels powerful, real, almost undeniable, yet it keeps slipping through your hands just when it starts to matter. This is where most people walk away, misunderstanding the very moment that reveals the truth. Because with an avoidant, love doesn't disappear, it hides behind distance. If an avoidant person truly has feelings for you, what you'll notice first is not ease, it's tension. Not because something is wrong, but because the connection is powerful enough to stir up emotions they've kept buried for a long time. There will be moments where everything feels deeply connected, calm conversations, a surprising sense of comfort, even a kind of closeness that feels rare and intense. And just when it starts to feel steady, something changes. They pull back, they become harder to reach, their energy feels distant, almost confusing. To most people, that shift feels like rejection, like something meaningful is slipping away. But with an avoidant, this is often where the real pattern begins to show itself. Their way of experiencing love isn't linear. It moves in waves, closeness, distance, warmth, withdrawal. If you don't understand this, it's easy to believe the connection is fading, when in reality, it's becoming too intense for them to handle internally. What makes it even more confusing is how real everything feels in the beginning. There's usually a strong pull, conversations go deeper than expected, silence feels comfortable instead of awkward, time together carries a different kind of weight. Even they feel it, though they may not say it out loud. They recognize that this connection is different, and that realization feels both grounding and unsettling for them at the same time. Because for someone with avoidant tendencies, closeness isn't just intimacy, it's exposure, and exposure triggers fear, not necessarily fear of you, but fear of what being close brings up inside them. The fear of losing independence, the fear of becoming too emotionally involved, the fear of being overwhelmed or eventually hurt. So as things start to deepen, they instinctively create space. You'll notice it in small ways first. Communication becomes less consistent. Their presence feels unpredictable. One moment they're fully there, the next they seem distant. This is usually where most people react. They try harder, reach out more, explain more, hoping effort will fix the distance. But with an avoidant, pressure has the opposite effect. The more intensity they feel, the more they step back to regain control. This is where your response becomes crucial. Their distance isn't always a sign that they don't care. Sometimes it's a sign that they care enough to feel overwhelmed. But if you react from fear, trying to close the gap with urgency, it often pushes them further away. Things begin to shift when you stop reacting and start grounding yourself instead, when you no longer treat every silence like a problem that needs fixing, when your sense of worth isn't tied to how available they are, when you stop chasing reassurance from someone who is already struggling with closeness. This isn't about becoming distant, it's about becoming steady, and when that happens, something changes in the dynamic. For the first time, they experience connection without pressure. They feel your presence without feeling trapped, your care without urgency, your interest without control. For someone who associates intimacy with losing freedom, this feels unfamiliar, but also safer. The cycle still continues. They step away, then come back. Sometimes slowly, sometimes casually, sometimes a little more open than before. And this is where people often misunderstand things again. Just because they return doesn't mean everything has changed. What matters is whether something is different each time they come back. When growth is happening, the changes are subtle. The distance doesn't last as long. The emotional gap isn't as wide. Conversations start to become a little more honest. Their presence feels slightly less guarded. They may still need space, but they don't disappear in the same extreme way. These small shifts matter because avoidant patterns don't change overnight. They soften gradually through repeated experiences. If nothing changes, if there's no increase in openness, no deeper awareness, no emotional growth, then the cycle is simply repeating itself. But if each return shows even a small step forward, then something deeper is evolving. Over time, they begin to learn through experience. They start to see that closeness doesn't automatically take away their independence, that emotional connection doesn't always lead to losing control, that caring for someone doesn't immediately bring danger. And this understanding doesn't come from being told, it comes from feeling safe again and again. They pull away, and nothing falls apart. They come back, and they're not met with anger or punishment. They show vulnerability, and it isn't met with chaos. Slowly, their system starts to adjust to a new kind of connection. At the same time, you begin to grow too. This dynamic doesn't just challenge them, it challenges you. You learn how to care without losing yourself. You stop letting their behavior control your emotions. You become more stable, more aware, more grounded in your own boundaries. This shift matters because relationships like this can't survive extremes. If one person keeps chasing while the other keeps running, it creates constant tension. But when both people start to adjust, when they become a little more present and you become more centered, the connection starts to move into a different space. It's not perfect, and it's not fully secure yet. But it's no longer driven by constant reactions. There's more awareness, more balance, more intention. And eventually, a quiet turning point begins to form, where the connection feels less like a cycle to survive and more like something that can actually grow. The shift is not loud or dramatic, but if you pay attention, you can see it. Their returns start to feel more steady. The distance is still there, but it is not as extreme. The way they communicate becomes more intentional. Instead of disappearing completely, they remain somewhat present, even when they feel overwhelmed. This is where many people overlook real progress because they are waiting for certainty, for something clear and undeniable. But with avoidant patterns, growth rarely looks like perfection. It shows up as a softening of extremes. The highs and lows are still there, but they are less intense. And when both people continue to grow, one learning how to feel safe in connection, the other learning how to stay balanced within themselves, the relationship stops being just a loop of fear and chasing. It begins to feel more conscious, more mutual, more real. It's not that fear disappears, it's that it stops controlling everything. When an avoidant starts choosing closeness, it's not just about comfort, it reflects a deeper trust forming within the connection. And when that happens, the dynamic begins to change in a noticeable way. It doesn't suddenly become easy or perfectly stable, but it feels different enough that you can sense the shift. You no longer feel like you're carrying everything on your own. There is a sense of shared effort. The connection doesn't feel one-sided anymore. Something subtle starts to balance out. It's no longer just them pulling away while you try to hold things together. There is movement from both sides. You begin to feel their effort. You notice intention where there used to be inconsistency. When they come back, it's not only about missing you during distance, it starts to reflect a growing understanding of what the connection actually means. And in that realization, something becomes clear. Some relationships don't last because they were easy. They last because both people changed enough to handle them better. The connection itself had to evolve, and so did the people in it. That's the part many people miss. Some connections are not meant to stay the same. They are meant to shape the people inside them. And when that kind of change is real, it shows in behavior, not just words. It shows in more consistency, in emotional presence, in the ability to stay connected without feeling like closeness is a threat. So when you're dealing with an avoidant who keeps coming back, the real question isn't just about the cycle. Anyone can repeat a pattern of leaving, missing, and returning. The deeper question is, what is actually changing inside that pattern? Are they opening up more over time, or just getting comfortable keeping things unclear? Are their returns bringing honesty and clarity, or more confusion? Are they starting to communicate before they withdraw? Or are you still left dealing with silence on your own? And just as important, you have to look at yourself. Are you becoming more grounded, more secure, more connected to your own worth? Or are you becoming more anxious, more drained, and more disconnected from yourself? The same dynamic can lead to very different outcomes depending on what it creates in both people. If it's building trust, improving communication, increasing awareness, and encouraging emotional responsibility on both sides, then something real may be growing. But if it's leaving you exhausted, uncertain, and slowly teaching you that inconsistency is love, then the lesson may not be about staying. It may be about leaving. This is why intensity cannot be your only guide. Strong feelings don't always mean healthy progress. Chemistry does not equal safety. Missing each other is not the same as building something stable. What matters more than how powerful it feels is the direction it's moving in. Another misunderstanding is thinking that when an avoidant comes back, it means they are fully ready or emotionally available. That's rarely true. Their return doesn't erase their fears. It doesn't guarantee they've changed completely. It simply shows that the connection still exists in some form. Even when things are improving, there will still be moments of distance. There may still be times when they pull back or feel overwhelmed. The difference is not that struggle disappears. It's how that struggle is handled. When growth is real, distance is not used to punish. Communication becomes clearer, even when space is needed. Silence is no longer about cutting off completely. Instead, space is acknowledged, sometimes explained, and eventually repaired. And as this happens, you begin to change as well. You stop reacting in the same intense ways. You learn to pause instead of assuming the worst. You start setting boundaries that protect your peace without shutting down emotionally. You become more steady. You still care, but you are no longer dependent on constant reassurance. This is what emotional maturity actually looks like. Not perfection, not a lack of conflict, but the ability to stay connected without letting fear control every response. Because at the center of this dynamic is a truth that can't be ignored. An avoidant cannot build something stable with someone who tries to fix them. And you cannot build something stable with an avoidant if you take responsibility for their fears. That's where many intense connections fall apart. One person keeps chasing, the other keeps pulling away, and the cycle continues without real change. When one person keeps giving more and the other keeps pulling away, the gap only grows. The harder one tries to create closeness, the more the other feels pressure instead of comfort. But when things start becoming healthier, both people begin to shift in small but important ways. The avoidant starts noticing their tendency to withdraw instead of acting on it automatically. They may still struggle, but now there's awareness. At the same time, you begin to see your own patterns more clearly. Instead of reacting immediately from anxiety, you learn to pause. You stop chasing. They stop disappearing as quickly. You no longer read every delay as rejection, and they no longer treat every emotional moment like something dangerous. That space in between, where neither person is reacting from fear, is where real change begins. It's not loud or dramatic, but it's real. And most genuine growth starts quietly before it becomes obvious. Over time, if the connection is truly improving, you'll notice a turning point that doesn't need an announcement. It shows up in small changes. The distance isn't as intense. When they come back, it feels more intentional. Communication becomes clearer, less avoidant, more direct. They may still struggle, but they don't completely shut down like before. These aren't big, dramatic transformations. They're small reductions in emotional extremes. And those small shifts matter more than people think because they show that fear is losing control over the relationship. At the same time, you're no longer losing yourself in the process. You stop tying your value to how present they are. You stop breaking down every time they create space. Instead, you stay grounded in who you are while still being open to the connection. That balance changes everything. The relationship stops being about panic and chasing and starts being about choice and presence. Without saying it directly, your actions begin to show that you care, but you won't abandon yourself to prove it. And that changes the foundation of the connection. If a relationship is truly moving towards something real, you will see both people growing. The avoidant becomes more capable of staying emotionally present. You become more secure and steady. The cycle starts to shorten. The distance becomes less extreme. The return becomes more honest. But if none of that is happening, if nothing is shifting, if the confusion keeps building, if you're the only one adjusting, then it's not growth, it's repetition. And repetition without change eventually turns into emotional exhaustion. That's why it's so important not to confuse strong attachment with real transformation. Just because something feels intense doesn't mean it's becoming healthy. Just because someone comes back doesn't mean things are improving. A meaningful connection doesn't stay stuck in the same loop. It grows, it becomes more stable, more honest, more emotionally responsible from both sides. And when that kind of change happens, the relationship starts to feel different. It no longer feels like you're constantly guessing, waiting, or trying to hold everything together. It begins to feel like something you can stand in without losing yourself. Not because fear disappears completely, but because it no longer controls every decision. That's when closeness stops feeling like something to escape from. It becomes something both people can actually stay in. In the end, the truth is simple. It's not about how intense the connection feels. It's about whether it's becoming more stable, more honest, and more balanced over time. An avoidant coming back doesn't mean much on its own. The real answer is in the pattern. If both people are becoming more aware, more grounded, and more emotionally responsible, then the connection may be growing into something real. But if confusion, inconsistency, and emotional exhaustion keep repeating, then it's not growth at all. It's just the same cycle, playing out again. Real love isn't built on chasing or waiting. It's built on mutual change, the kind that makes closeness feel safe instead of something to run from. What makes this dynamic so confusing is that it often feels meaningful, even when it's not actually moving forward. The emotional highs and lows can create a sense of depth, like something important is happening, when in reality, it's just a pattern repeating itself. That push and pull can feel addictive because every moment of closeness feels earned, and every moment of distance feels like something you need to fix. A lot of this comes down to how each person learned to deal with closeness early on. Someone with avoidant tendencies usually associates emotional intimacy with pressure, loss of control, or even discomfort they can't fully explain. So when things start to feel too close, their instinct is to create space, not necessarily because they don't care, but because closeness triggers something in them that feels unsafe. On the other side, someone with anxious tendencies often experiences that distance as a threat. When the other person pulls away, it can feel like rejection or abandonment, even if that's not the intention. So the natural response becomes reaching out more, trying harder, asking for reassurance, or attempting to restore the connection as quickly as possible. The problem is that both responses unintentionally reinforce each other. The more one person pursues, the more the other feels overwhelmed and pulls back. The more one withdraws, the more the other feels anxious and pushes forward. It becomes a loop where both people are reacting to fear, just in opposite ways. Breaking that cycle doesn't happen through intensity or effort alone. It happens through awareness and regulation. For the avoidant person, growth looks like staying present a little longer than feels comfortable, communicating instead of disappearing, and recognizing that not all closeness leads to loss of independence. For the anxious person, growth looks like learning to self-soothe, resisting the urge to chase, and realizing that someone else's distance is not always a reflection of their worth. What's important is that both people are doing that work. If only one person is becoming more self-aware while the other continues the same behaviors without reflection, the imbalance remains. And over time, that imbalance creates resentment, confusion, and emotional burnout. Another key part of this is learning to pay attention to consistency instead of potential. It's easy to get attached to who someone could be or how the connection feels in its best moments. But what actually defines the relationship is the pattern over time. Are things becoming more stable? Is communication improving? Are both people taking responsibility for how they show up? Small, consistent changes are a much stronger indicator of growth than occasional intense moments of connection. Anyone can show up fully for a short period of time. What matters is whether that effort is sustained and whether it becomes part of the normal dynamic. It's also important to recognize the difference between patience and self-abandonment. Being patient means allowing space for gradual growth while still maintaining your boundaries and sense of self. Self-abandonment is when you tolerate ongoing confusion, inconsistency, or emotional unavailability while convincing yourself that things will eventually change. That line can be hard to see when you're emotionally invested, but one clear sign is how you feel over time. Are you becoming more secure, more calm, more grounded? Or are you becoming more anxious, more uncertain, and more drained? A healthy connection doesn't remove all challenges, but it should gradually feel safer, not more destabilizing. You shouldn't have to constantly analyze someone's behavior, guess how they feel, or question where you stand. Clarity, even if it comes slowly, should be increasing, not disappearing. There's also a point where you have to accept what someone is showing you, instead of waiting for what they might eventually become. Growth is possible, but it has to be chosen and demonstrated through actions, not just words or temporary changes. And one of the hardest truths in this dynamic is that love alone doesn't fix the pattern. You can care deeply about each other and still be stuck in a cycle that doesn't allow either person to feel safe or fulfilled. Real change requires both people to be willing to face their own patterns, take responsibility, and do something different consistently. When that happens, the relationship starts to feel less like something you're trying to manage and more like something you can trust. There's less guessing, less overthinking, and less emotional whiplash. You don't feel like you're constantly bracing for the next shift in energy. Instead, there's a growing sense of steadiness. You know where you stand more often than not. You feel considered, not confused. And even when there are moments of distance or difficulty, they don't immediately trigger panic because there's a foundation of consistency underneath it. If that foundation never forms, then no matter how strong the connection feels at times, it won't become something stable. And staying in that cycle too long can slowly disconnect you from yourself because you start prioritizing the relationship over your own emotional well-being. That's why it's so important to keep coming back to your own experience. Not just what you feel for them, but how the connection makes you feel about yourself. The right kind of relationship won't require you to shrink, chase, or constantly prove your worth. It will meet you with enough consistency and care that you can stay open without losing your balance. This connection is not defined by how intense it feels, but by how much it evolves. Real love here is not about chasing or withdrawing, but about two people slowly learning to meet each other without losing themselves. If growth is present, the chaos softens into clarity, and the distance transforms into understanding. But if nothing changes, then no matter how strong it feels, it remains a cycle, not a connection. The truth is simple: love that is real will not just return, it will mature.